And, this whole thing behind net zero and the investments and all of this, people need to understand that if they really believed in this agenda and they were going to do this, you wouldn't have Brookfield announcing right now that they're acquiring one of the biggest pipelines in the United States for $10 billion. They wouldn't be putting their investments in that. They wouldn't own pipelines in Canada. They wouldn't own pipelines around the world. That's not green energy, that's fossil fuels. And when called out on that, Mark Carney said at committee a few years ago, well, you just don't understand the world economy. No, we understand BS when we can see it, when we can smell it, and that's why we're calling it out. And for those that don't know, GFANZ is now falling apart because of all of these investigations that are being spearheaded, mostly in the United States. BlackRock has said, okay, I don't want to be associated with this. See you later. And they're now pulling out of this. They're not pulling out of that because of anything other than the scam is now been caught and they're being called out on it, and people are being ripped off. People don't like being ripped off, especially people that are wealthy people and powerful people that don't know that this is happening. So you have Carney jumping out of that into Brookfield. He was made chair of Brookfield, but all the while, and this seemed to start while he was in the Governor Bank of England position, he's starting to really be interested in forming a lot of very strong ties to strong people in China, the Asia Infrastructure Bank, the Bank of China, Xi Jinping, the president. And over the course of the last 10 years, he has really been building a lot more very secure relationships within the Chinese government. We find that in the fall of 2024, after he's appointed to be the Liberal financial advisor, he immediately jets off to China, has meetings with Xi Jinping, the president. Then he lobbies the mayor of Beijing that, you should be working closer with foreign investors and Western investors, and then has a chat with the head of the Bank of China to secure a $250 million loan for Brookfield in order to stabilize their real estate investments in China. And then immediately says, you know what, I think I'm done with this. I'm going to move over and launch a leadership bid for the Liberal Party of Canada. But that agenda is going to follow him from every inclination that we've seen. So you've recently put out a tweet that the main crisis that is going to go on in Canada is Mark Carney. So from all of your experience, even though you said that you haven't worked directly with him, you've been very aware of him in these circles. What is Canada in for if Mark Carney becomes the leader of the country?
Government overreach, high energy prices, deindustrialization, censorship. That's I traveled for years in his circles. I was part of the World Economic Forum. I worked with his people. And again, I'm very upfront that I was part of it. I was a driving force. But, I start changing in 2021 and I start becoming very contrarian to their agenda in 2022 and pushing back. What was so astounding was this. Being in the room, and you've got, a real network of global elites, and you're talking about academic luminaries, big politicians, and obviously the corporate elite, right? From, every, the big consulting companies, law firms, banks, asset managers like BlackRock. And what was incredible is that the agenda, it was all about rhetoric, and it was all about driving more regulation, right? More, government policy to control everyone's daily life. But again, like dressed up in that, this little room, like is saving the planet. There was always that phrase, saving the planet and people. And, by 2022, right, over the last few years, like there are a lot of data points coming in. And what was remarkable was how detached everyone in the room is to actually like what's happening in the real world, right? Just a total detachment from democracy. But, their sole goal was just to enshrine these laws, these regulations, so that they have a job for life, right? You have to understand, this is it's a big money spinner. ESG is a multi-trillion-dollar industrial complex. So the more you fearmonger, right, and, scare people that there's a climate emergency, the more climate rules you have, controlling everything from how you heat your house, what you drive, or if you could drive, to, what you can use in your economy, your natural resources, to drive, cheaper energy, right? Everything is coming in. And here's the other thing is that if you question, right? So if you question in the World Economic Forum circles, and if you question in a lot of, Western countries today, if you question, say, hang on a second, my electricity bill didn't go down, it's going up. You're called a climate denier. Cancel culture.
Or,
which one?
Or, well, just think about how expensive it would be. That's the other line.
It's crazy. And so debate is just not allowed. So when I would raise my hand and say, hang on, right? Net zero hasn't driven cheaper energy or more jobs or more more efficient productivity. DEI isn't driving more diversity of thought. ESG, corporate ESG strategy isn't driving more profitability or, profitability in investments. Immediately you're just, there was a personal attack, right? That you're a climate denier. Like that's what would happen to me in these circles. And the harm on society, the reality, the data points, and even the economic data points. Europe is a leader in this movement, in the Green Deal, right? And you're showing what's happening to Europe. Productivity declines, GDP shrinkage. Look at Germany. Like Germany's a mess. And there was just this disregard. No one cared. And you're going, wait a second, but you are misleading the public. You are not providing an accurate or truthful cost-benefit analysis. You need to ask people, is it okay if you pay twice as much on your energy bills? You can't just force it down their throat, right? Or say that it's cheaper when it's more expensive. But that's what it's like to be in the room there with Carney's people. It's just you're personally attacked, you're silenced, you're dismissed. It is about it's about their power play because they have a job for life. And again, this is these are, folks, they're on the center stage, right? They're praised because they're doing good. They all dress in this moral cloak. They take this moral superiority stance when the last thing that they will discuss is the effects on ordinary citizens. And I always point down in these circles to this day, there's a difference between intention, aspiration, and results. And you can't judge a policy on its intention. Milton Friedman said this. You have to judge it. It's very dangerous to judge a policy on intention. You have to judge it on results. The results are in, and it's negative. And that's what like is so scary about this total dismissal of the market data, the economic data coming in. And that's what I found very, very scary and very, it's subverting democracy. There are times where we get it wrong. And that's okay, right? Human nature is flawed. But these folks, I don't care. Like Mark Carney's on like a bunch of boards. He's made like so much money. Brookfield and Bloomberg and Stripe and right PIMCO. And then he has all his influence around like all these big universities, Harvard and Oxford and think tanks and World Economic Forum. He gets, I think, I don't know for sure, but I believe he's getting 6 figures for some of his speaking engagements. So, he's making a bundle. And guess what? That's okay, right? We live in a capitalist society. All right. But what is disgusting is that he's disingenuous. There's a con here. Because while he's lining his pocket, and remember, he's not elected. He's just being appointed, right? And like he's moving up this like political ladder. Not off of success, not off of helping people, but he's dressing it up as if like his legacy, to date, his heritage is all about working for people and saving the planet. It's a total opposite. It's a total power play. Get more regulation, get more government control, more fear mongering. So, these people can stay in power. They can like subvert people into subservience and really line their pocket, because each of these advisory gigs, boy, are they lucrative. And these are big jobs, getting big fat salaries, pretending that they're helping. Just the opposite. That's what I would say. GFANZ, the World Economic Forum, it's just like, these are just vested interest groups, like misleading the public and suppressing the public.
Well, and you have this, I think what a lot of people don't take into account is that whenever there is a crisis, doesn't matter what it is, there's going to be a group of people that get rich off of it, because a crisis creates a existential need for some product, whether it's war, and in that case, all of the war machine manufacturers, they're the ones getting rich, and that's what we saw in the 20th century. It was a vested interest for the U.S. to always be at war with somebody, and they did everything that they could to ensure that was the case. But then when kind of world peace started to kind of introduce itself as slowly as it did, there needed to be a new emergency to get people rich. Well, what ended up happening? Well, now we have the energy crisis and we have the climate crisis. And to your point, I think the Liberals have now found out that they're not going to get elected off of the climate crisis. So what is the new crisis now? Well, it's the Trump crisis. And a lot of people are trying to point out that the issue with Canada did not begin with Trump. And much to our amazement, maybe we shouldn't be surprised, but Carney recently said in a press conference that the affordability crisis caused right now is not caused by anyone in this country. And it's just shocking to hear him say that when you have 10 years of failed far left policy that have doubled and in some cases tripled housing costs in Canada, have shrunk our GDP dramatically. Our GDP per capita is actually showing that our living standards are going down instead of going up. And our healthcare system is a mess. Immigration is out of control by a group called the Century Initiative, trying to increase our population to 100 million by the end of this century. And now you have Mark Carney coming in and saying, you know what? All of your problems are caused by Donald Trump, and you need to trust my resume. And ironically, I think Canadians need to look at that and say, yes, we need to trust your resume. And we're going to evaluate that and say, you're a disaster. We don't want you as leader of this country, because you're already trying to steal credit for navigating the 2008 financial crisis in Canada. All you did was adjust interest rates, and you were advising to print more money. And thank goodness the Conservative government at the time said no. And the previous Liberal government is also criticizing Carney for saying that, because they're saying, well, wait a minute, we helped avoid the financial crisis by introducing legislation to prevent a lot of the mortgage elasticity that was going on in the United States. So it was the previous Liberal and then subsequent Conservative government that actually navigated that. Then he goes over to England and said, well, I navigated England through Brexit. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? And then you went to Brookfield, and you're creating tax havens for their money. There's new reports coming out that they are, violating the rights of Indigenous peoples all over the world in the pursuit of investments. And then he's trying to come in Canada and saying, I will help all the little people now. I have made all my money. Canada is in an existential crisis. I'm going to help all the little people. Never mind that he was at a conference in the fall of 2024 where he was asked, about public policy, and his response was, well, we need to affect change in public policy so it impacts the market. And he was asked, are you going to, get closer to public office? And he refused to answer. So it's interesting that in the fall of 2024, you have Mark Carney essentially saying the quiet part out loud, that people get rich if we can ensure that public policy and regulation forces the market to go where we want it to, and we already have our money there. And he gave his first inclinations that he was going to run for public office then. And our theory had been that he has been massaging all of these relationships with China, and we don't know what he's done with his assets prior to coming in public office, and we won't know until after the election, conveniently. But our theory is that he is now he's running to be prime minister in order to affect that public policy, which is going to then further make him monstrously rich with all of the investments that Brookfield has embedded in China, and preventing pipelines in Canada in order to jack up the investment value that Brookfield is about to have. And the last thing that I'll say in my ramble is, the most shocking thing to me is that the day that Mark Carney called an election, his successor at Brookfield on the same day was meeting with Xi Jinping, president of China. If that doesn't stand the hairs up on the back of your neck, I don't know what will.
It is, that's why I, posted what I did is because, I have inside insights. And right now, U.S. tariffs, that is just not Canada's crisis. Electing Carney will be. He is not telling the truth about the affordability crisis. He's not telling the truth about the climate hoax. And he will shrink the economy. And again, I just point to Germany. Look what the Green Deal has done to Germany, this Davos agenda. And just think about your own freedoms, right? Freedom of speech, freedom to decide, what you want to drive, how you want to heat your house, being able, to work and earn a decent standard of living. And Mark Carney and these Davos elites, and again, I also consider Most of the leaders in Europe and the current administration in the UK, they're all the same. They all have the same agenda. And you look at, and you can just look at, there's plenty of economic data to show that this leads to less productivity, lower GDP per capita. It leads to less innovation, less research and development spend, right? Less of a startup culture. And then very scarily, it leads to limits. It is all connected to limits on free speech, on the ability to debate, the ability to disagree, dissent, to protest. Look at Carney's op-ed, in response to the truckers' rebellion, right? I mean, calling that sedition and debanking people, right? He will promote a central bank digital currency. That is extremely scary. The government has full control on your life and can spit you right out of society. So, I would say first and foremost, for democratic values, do not vote for him if you have any, value on democracy, but also, for economic prosperity. This guy is just like a natural resource thief. I think it's disgusting Canada is such a rich, is so natural resource rich. Even if, let's say, in the future, climate change does become a big problem, you need economic growth and prosperity to address it. You can't have a shrinking economy. You can't address problems when the lights go out, And, so that I felt, strongly, because I have these World Economic Forum insights, and I've traveled with Carney's circle. I'm still in their circle. I still am the contrarian voice in the room. I thought it was important because I could just see another crisis. His brand is crisis. Carney's brand is crisis, and he's manufacturing the one, and that's duplicitous. It's not right.
Well, the good news is there's millions of Canadians across this country that have seen through it. There's millions of Canadians across this country that are ready to stand up for change, and they're not believing the polls that are being fed to them. And in our work in working with the EDAs around us, and in door knocking, talking to voters, it's a different message that we're hearing at the doors when we're talking to real people versus what is being rammed down everybody's throat from the mainstream media, which is Mark Carney is this savior. People, the average Canadian, they don't even know who Mark Carney is. And what they're most concerned about is, how do I pay my next grocery bill? And they're having a hard time doing that right now. So we still have a couple of weeks in this election to make sure that we secure a common sense victory and move away from this radical left agenda that has just decimated our country for the last 10 years. And I hope that most Canadians can see that we cannot afford essentially more of the same or even worse when it comes to Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau's successor. But I want to thank you, Desiree, for your courage. That must have been really daunting, having to stand up and call that out and continuing that fight, because a lot of people will criticize people. Well, you used to be a part of that. Well, in a lot of cases, you have to have been a part of that in order to see what is actually going on and to be able to call it out effectively. So I applaud you for that, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers will be applauding you for that. And our message is, keep doing what you're doing. We're all behind you. We need to call out this hypocrisy. We can't let these corrupt bankers just continue to tell the world what they need and get rich off of it. Whenever they move on from the climate crisis, there's going to be another one, no doubt, that they're going to try and get rich off of. So